My name is Jack, and I took this job because my life had been stripped down to the studs. The office where I finalized the deal was a single, wide trailer baking in the South Florida sun, its aluminum siding peeling like a bad sunburn. The air inside was thick, smelling of stale cigarette smoke, mildew, and the quiet desperation that hangs around places that deal exclusively in cash. Outside, the endless expanse of the Everglades shimmered in the heat, a flat, green line that promised nothing but more heat and humidity. I was a long way from the crisp mountain air I was used to. A refugee from a life that had collapsed under the weight of bad decisions and worse luck. The man behind the desk, a sweaty fellow named Rick, counted out my advance with thick, stained fingers. He didn't ask for a resume or references. The only qualification seemed to be a willingness to disappear for a few days and not ask too many questions. The job came from a tattered flyer I'd found pinned to a gas station bulletin board, promising hard work. Good pay for a deckhand on a fishing boat. It was the kind of ad you either ignore or answer when you have no other choice. I was firmly in the latter category. This cash-only arrangement felt like it belonged to a bygone era of poachers and rum runners, men who used the swamp's vast, untraceable wilderness to hide their dealings. I wasn't a criminal, but I was running from the ghosts of debt, and this felt like a place where ghosts could get lost. Rick gave me a curt nod. Captain's name is Silas. He'll be waiting for you at the docks off the Tamiami. Don't be late. The docks were less a marina and more a collection of weathered planks clinging to the edge of a murky canal. A handful of boats were tied up, mostly specialized vessels designed for these unique waters. There were flat-bottomed John boats and a few sleek flats boats, built low to the water for navigating the shallow grassy plains that give the Everglades its nickname, the River of Grass. And then there was my ride. She was named the Cypress Witch, the letters painted in faded black on her stern. She wasn't a tourist's airboat, built for thrills and speed, but a workhorse. She looked like a heavily modified center console boat, maybe 25 feet long, with a shallow draft designed to slip through the narrow vegetation, choked waterways where other boats would ground out. Her hull was a roadmap of scars and deep gouges, testament to countless encounters with submerged logs, Worcester bars, or worse. This was not a vessel for recreation, it was a tool, honed and hardened by its environment. A man stood on the deck, coiling a rope with an economy of motion that spoke of a lifetime at sea. This had to be Silas. He was as weathered as his boat, his skin the texture of tanned leather, his eyes a pale, washed out blue that seemed to look right through me. He wasn't the jolly, bearded sailor of postcards. There was a hollowness to him, a profound stillness that was more unsettling than any loud aggression. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out by a long, grim duty, a survivor from one of the many tragedies that the Everglades are known for swallowing whole, from lost planes to murdered men. "You Jack?" he asked, his voice a low rasp, like sand on stone. I nodded. "That's me. Get your gear. We leave at dusk." He didn't offer a handshake. As I stowed my small duffel bag, I noticed strange markings carved into the wooden frame of the cabin door and the window casings. They weren't nautical knots or decorative flourishes. They were geometric patterns. A 5-pointed star here. A complex mesh like grid there. They looked like something ancient, symbols of protection you might find scratched into the walls of an old church to ward off evil. On a fishing boat in the middle of Florida, they were deeply out of place. The boat wasn't just a tool, it was a fortress. As the sun began to bleed across the horizon, painting the sky in fiery oranges and purples, Silas called me over. He didn't give me a safety briefing about life vests or fire extinguishers. Instead, he handed me a grimy, laminated card, its edges softened with wear. "The rules," he said, his tone devoid of any irony. It was the same dead, serious gravity a pilot might use before takeoff. I took the card. My grandfather was a fisherman, a man steeped in the superstitions of the sea, and I figured this was just more of the same. Quirks and traditions to appease the fickle gods of the water. I suppressed a cynical smile and read the list. 1. No bananas on board, not even in a trail mix. Don't test this. 2. The right foot steps on board first. The left foot steps off first. Always. 3. Never whistle after sunset. It calls the wind and what rides it. 4. If you hear an owl, you don't. Look at your feet until the sound is gone. 5. We only keep the mangrove snapper. Everything else goes back, no matter the size or value. 6. A portion of the first snapper's heart is returned to the water. An offering. All fish bones and guts are burned in the brazier. Nothing organic goes overboard. 8. Never speak the name Stygiani, not even to ask what it means. 9. If the water glows with a red light, cut the lines and do not look at your reflection. 10. Do not bring any light source into the cabin between midnight and 3 a.m. I read the list twice. It was a bizarre cocktail of common maritime folklore and deeply specific, unsettling commands. No bananas, a classic sailor's tale. But Rule Fe 4 and Rule 98 felt different. They felt personal, rooted in a fear that was anything but generic. I wanted to ask, to press him on what a Stygiani was, but the finality in his eyes stopped me. He wasn't sharing eccentricities, he was giving orders. "Got it?" he asked. "Got it," I lied, tucking the card into my pocket. Silas grunted, satisfied. He started the engine. A low rumble that settled into a steady thrum, and we pulled away from the dock, heading into the heart of the swamp. The transition from the world of men to the world of the Everglades was absolute. As we moved deeper into the labyrinthine waterways, the last vestiges of civilization, the distant glow of Miami, the rumble of traffic on the highway, vanished. We were swallowed by the night. At first, it was beautiful in a way that made you feel small and insignificant. The sky was a revelation. With no light pollution, the natural lightscape, as the Park Service calls it, was overwhelming. The Milky Way wasn't a faint dusting of stars. It was a thick, luminous band. A celestial river of light painted across a canvas of perfect black. So clear you could see the dark clouds of interstellar dust blocking the stars beyond. The moon was a silver dollar, its light reflecting off the still, black water, making it look like a sheet of polished obsidian. But the beauty was a mask. As my eyes adjusted, the awe was slowly replaced by a primal unease. The world was not silent. It was a deafening symphony of life. A high-pitched, incessant drone of mosquitoes formed the baseline, a constant reminder of the billion tiny, hungry things that owned this place. Beneath that was the chugging, croaking chorus of countless frogs, a rhythmic, almost intelligent sound that seemed to mock our intrusion. Every few minutes, a loud splash from the darkness would make me jump. A fish, a bird, something larger. I felt a profound sense of isolation, a feeling that if something went wrong out here, no one would ever find us. This vast wetland had a history of making things disappear. Silas cut the engine in a wide, shallow bay, the water thick with sawgrass. The silence that followed the engine's death was somehow louder than the noise. "We start here," he said, handing me a rod. As I baited my hook, I scanned the darkness, and that's when I saw them. Pairs of tiny, glowing embers just above the water's surface. Dozens of them. They were all around us, watching, waiting. Alligator eyes, catching the moonlight. It's a common sight on the night tours they sell to tourists, a way to experience the thrill of the ecosystem's nocturnal giants. But out here, with no guide, no guardrails, just one other man and a list of insane rules, it wasn't a thrill. It was a warning. The real tooth and claw dangers of this place were plain to see. It made me wonder what unseen dangers had inspired the rules on that card in my pocket. The beauty of this place was a lie. A deceptive skin hiding something ancient, hungry, and patient. And we were floating right in the middle of its hunting grounds. The first few hours of work were a grueling, sweat-soaked grind that pushed all thoughts of the strange rules to the back of my mind. The air was a wet blanket, so thick with humidity you could almost drink it. Mosquitoes, despite the repellent I'd bathed in, descended in whining clouds every time the breeze died down. The work was simple but relentless. Bait the hooks with shrimp and mojaras, cast into the inky blackness, and wait. The fishing was good. Too good. Almost every cast yielded a strike. We pulled in one fish after another, their silver bodies thrashing in the dim light of the boat's deck lamps. There were powerful line, stripping tarpon, their scales like polished chrome, stubborn redfish, bulldogging their way through the water, and the occasional speckled sea trout. Each time, the routine was the same. I'd haul the fish over the side, and Silas would look at it with a flat, appraising stare before unhooking it and tossing it back into the water. "That one must have been 20 pounds, I said, after a particularly strong snook fought me for 10 minutes. "Worth good money." "We don't keep the snook," Silas said, not looking at me. "Rule 5. We only kept the mangrove snapper, a much smaller, less impressive fish." When we finally landed the first one, Silas performed a bizarre ritual. He laid the fish on a small cutting board, and with a sharp fillet knife, he expertly sliced out its still, beating heart. He cut a small piece from it and tossed the morsel overboard. "An offering," he muttered, more to the water than to me. The rest of the fish, guts, bones, head and all, was not thrown back. He carried it to a small, rusted metal brazier bolted to the deck and set it on fire. A plume of greasy, foul-smelling smoke coiled into the night air, a stark violation of the otherwise pristine darkness. Every piece of organic waste from our work was to be burned. Nothing went overboard. It was inefficient, strange, and deeply unsettling. I was beginning to understand that this wasn't a fishing trip. It was a ceremony. The monotony and the heat were a potent combination, inducing a state of drowsy autopilot. My movements became mechanical, my thoughts drifting. To keep myself awake, I started to hum, a tuneless little melody from a song I barely remembered. The humming turned into a low, soft whistle. It was a sound of comfort, a small piece of human noise to push back against the oppressive, alien chorus of the swamp. I only realized my mistake when the world went silent. The steady, reliable thrum of the Cypress Witch's engine sputtered, coughed, and died. The abrupt absence of its noise was a physical blow, plunging us into a silence so profound it felt like the world had stopped breathing. The cacophony of frogs and insects ceased at the exact same moment, as if a switch had been flipped. Silas, who had been baiting a line, froze solid, his head snapped up, his eyes wide with a kind of primal terror I had never seen on a human face. He didn't shout. His voice was a low, desperate hiss that cut through the silence like a razor. "What did you do?" My blood ran cold. The half-formed whistle died on my lips. "What? I didn't do anything." "You were whistling?" he accused, his voice trembling with a terrifying mixture of rage and fear. "Rule 3. You never whistle. You call the wind and what rides it." The superstition about whistling challenging the wind was an old one, something I'd heard from sailors my whole life. But Silas's reaction told me this was no mere sailor's yarn. The engine failing at that exact moment, the entire swamp falling silent, it was too much to be a coincidence. The faulty technology, a classic horror trope, suddenly wasn't a trope at all. It was our reality, amplifying our isolation 100-fold. As if on cue, the natural sounds returned, but they were twisted, malevolent. The wind began to pick up, not as a gentle breeze, but in sharp, sighing gusts that rustled the miles of surrounding sawgrass. The sound wasn't like rustling leaves. It was sibilant, like a million hushed, conspiratorial whispers. The frog chorus started again, but the rhythm was off, their croaks sounding less like a natural symphony and more like mocking, guttural laughter. And then we heard it. Who? It was the call of an owl, but it was wrong. It was too deep, too loud, impossibly close. It wasn't the sound of a bird, it was a presence. The Seminole legends speak of the Stygiani's cry as a horrible, guttural sound, an omen of imminent death. This was that sound. It vibrated in my bones, a sound of pure menace that promised violence. Before I could even turn my head towards the sound, Silas was on me. He grabbed the front of my shirt, his knuckles white, and shoved my head down with brutal force. Rule 4, he snarled, his face inches from mine, his breath hot with panic. You heard nothing! Look at your feet! Don't. Up. His terror was more contagious than any virus. I was no longer a skeptic. I was a believer. I squeezed my eyes shut and stared down at the fiberglass deck of the boat, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. We stood there, frozen, two men in a small boat adrift in an ancient darkness, waiting for the thing we had summoned to pass us by. The silence stretched for an eternity. Then, a solid THUMP landed on the cabin roof directly above our heads. It was heavy. Far too heavy to be a bird, even a large one. My mind flashed to the stories of the skunk ape, the southern Bigfoot said to roam these swamps, but this felt different, older. A slow, scraping sound followed, the noise of long claws dragging across fiberglass. It was methodically, deliberately moving around up there, testing the structure. I couldn't help it. My will broke. I had to see. But I remembered Silas's warning. I didn't look up. I looked down. I risked a glance over the side of the boat, at the water's glassy, black surface. What I saw there will be burned into my memory until the day I die. The reflection was wrong. It wasn't a perfect mirror of our boat against the starry sky. The reflection was distorted, nightmarish. In the dark water, I could see the reflection of the Cypress Witch, but perched on its roof was a figure. A tall, emaciated, shadowy thing that was horribly, impossibly long. It had the vague shape of a man, but its head was tilted at a bird-like angle and too huge. Luminous discs glowed where its eyes should have been. It was a twisted hybrid of man and owl, a creature of pure nightmare pulled from the darkest corners of folklore. A strangled gasp escaped my lips, just as the thing in the reflection seemed to turn its head towards me. The boat's engine roared to life with a deafening explosion of sound. Silas had been frantically working the ignition, and it had finally caught. He slammed the throttle forward, and the Cypress Witch lurched, throwing me against the gunwale. When I looked back at the water, the reflection was normal again. The presence was gone. The whispering wind died down, and the frogs resumed their natural, rhythmic chorus. The world had returned to what passed for normal in this place. Silas didn't say a word. He just steered us away, his face a pale, sweat-slicked mask in the moonlight. We didn't talk for the rest of the night. We didn't have to. The rules were real, and we had just broken one. We caught no more fish. It was as if the water itself had turned barren, shunning us for our transgression. The offering had been rejected. We were no longer welcome. The first hint of dawn was a pale, sickly gray line on the eastern horizon, promising an end to the longest night of my life. The oppressive darkness began to recede. But the terror it had brought remained, a cold knot in my stomach. The air was still and heavy. As soon as the light was strong enough to see his face clearly, I confronted Silas. My voice was hoarse, cracking with fear and exhaustion. "What was that? You have to tell me what that thing was." Silas looked at me, his eyes hollowed out, aged a decade since sunset. He saw me not as a deckhand anymore, but as a liability, a fool who had stumbled into a church and desecrated the altar. He let out a long, shuddering breath, the sound of a man who had carried a terrible secret for too long. "The last kid I had out here," he began, his voice barely a whisper, "was like you, cocky. Thought the rules were a joke, a game." He stared out at the gray water, his gaze distant. He brought a banana on board, tucked it in his lunch sack. I didn't know until it was too late. I thought of Rule Fay 1, the most common, almost comical, of all maritime superstitions. But the way Silas spoke of it, there was no humor, only dread. "The fishing went dead," he continued, "instantly. Then the rot started. The bait turned foul in an hour. We both got sick, a fever that came on fast and hard." He laughed it off, said it was bad shrimp. That night, I was in the cabin, trying to sweat out the fever. I heard him scream, just once. When I got out on deck, he was gone. All that was left was his lunch sack and a single, half-eaten banana floating on the water. The story hung in the air between us, as thick and foul as the smoke from the brazier. A young man, vanished without a trace. Another statistic swallowed by the Everglades. A place with a long and storied history of disappearances that defied easy explanation. The banana wasn't the cause, it was an invitation. A sign of disrespect that broke the fragile truce. Just as I was trying to absorb the horror of his story, a new sound intruded upon our fragile silence. It started as a distant whine, but quickly grew into a deafening roar. Moments later, an airboat burst out from a narrow channel between the mangroves, its powerful fan engine tearing the morning stillness to shreds. It was a party boat, a garish tourist trap, with powerful floodlights cutting through the sacred gloom and loud, thumping music blaring from speakers. On its deck, a group of drunk college kids were shouting and laughing, their voices a profane intrusion into this ancient place. The conflict between the natural soundscape and their manufactured noise was a physical assault. They veered dangerously close to us, their wake rocking the cypress witch. One of them, a young man with a backwards baseball cap, saw us. He raised his beer can in a mock toast. "Look, locals!" he yelled to his friends. Then, seeing our grim faces, he did the worst possible thing. He cupped his hands around his mouth and let out a loud, stupid, mocking hoot. Who? Silas's face went white. "No," he breathed. It wasn't a warning. It was a prayer. The consequence was immediate. The roar of the airboat's engine choked and died, just as ours had. Their floodlights flickered violently, and then extinguished, plunging their boat into the same primordial darkness we inhabited. The sudden silence was punctuated by their confused, drunken shouts. "Hey! What gives? Dude, the engine's dead!" Then, from the dense, tangled darkness of a nearby mangrove island, came the answer. It wasn't the deep, resonant hoot from before. It was a shriek, a high, piercing scream of predatory fury that was followed by a heavy, wet splash. This was the set piece, the main event. Silas and I could only watch in frozen, muted horror. A shape, blacker than the shadows it emerged from, launched itself from the island onto the deck of the airboat. It was huge, taller than a man, impossibly thin, with long, spindly limbs that moved with a horrifying, jerky speed. It was the thing from the reflection, but now it was real, solid, and utterly terrifying. It was the Stygiani. We couldn't see the details, only its silhouette against the lightening sky. But we heard everything. The screams of the tourists were cut short, replaced by sickening, wet, tearing sounds. The crunch of bone, the heavy, meaty thuds of bodies hitting the deck. It was over in less than a minute. The creature was a whirlwind of violence, ripping them apart with a strength that was simply not of this world, driven by a singular, terrible purpose to feast on their hearts. Silence reclaimed the swamp once more, a silence now heavy with the weight of slaughter. The abandoned airboat drifted aimlessly, a floating tomb. My body was shaking uncontrollably, my mind struggling to process the atrocity I had just witnessed. Silas finally spoke, his voice dead, devoid of all emotion. "We're not fishing for snapper, Jack." I turned to look at him, my mind a blank slate of terror. "We're fishing for it," he clarified, his gaze fixed on the drifting airboat. "This whole thing, it's a ritual, an appeasement." The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The strange rules, the specific fish, the offering of the heart, the burning of the remains. It was all a tribute, a tax paid to the ancient, territorial entity that had claimed these waters long before men had names for them. The rules weren't just superstitions. They were the wards, the liturgical steps that allowed them to perform their grim duty without being devoured themselves. "The poison in the water," he whispered, "the mercury everyone talks about. It's not just from pollution. It's from it. Its presence taints the land, sickens the fish." I finally understood. We weren't fishermen. We were priests, unwilling acolytes in a forgotten, terrifying religion, tasked with feeding a god that, if left hungry, would feed on anyone who trespassed in its domain. The tourists hadn't just been killed for their foolishness. They had been the offering we had failed to provide. And now, its appetite whetted, the god of the swamp was turning its attention to us. The Stygiani, its hunger stoked, but not sated by the massacre on the airboat, now considered us the main course. The final hours before sunrise became a tense, claustrophobic siege. The vast, open water of the Everglades, which had felt so isolating before, now felt like a naked, exposed arena. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The creature didn't attack directly. It was intelligent, cruel. It began a campaign of psychological warfare. It circled our small boat, a silent shadow in the periphery. We'd hear a soft tapping on the hull, first on the port side, then instantly on the starboard. It was toying with us, a cat with two terrified mice. Then came the voices, faint, ghostly whispers carried on the wind, mimicking the last panicked shouts of the dead tourists. "Help me, it's in the water." Oh God, it was a monstrous, predatory ventriloquism designed to break our minds before it broke our bodies. I was on the verge of shattering. Every creak of the boat, every ripple on the water, sent a fresh wave of panic through me. I huddled in the center of the deck, clutching a gaff hook like a talisman, my eyes darting into the darkness. Silas, however, seemed to be galvanized by the sheer desperation of our situation. The hollowed out fear in his eyes was replaced by a hard, flinty resolve. He knew we couldn't just wait for dawn. We had to fight back. "There's a way," he rasped, his voice tight. "An old story. The medicine people knew. The Stygiani, it's a witch. To change to become that thing, it has to leave its human parts behind." He explained the core of the legend, the creature's one grotesque vulnerability: to transform. The witch vomits up its soul, its blood, its internal organs, and hangs them from the high branches of a tree, usually deep in the woods, away from prying eyes. Those organs are its anchor to its human form. If we find them, Silas said, his eyes burning with a mad hope, if we destroy them, it can't change back. The sun will burn it away. It will be trapped in its monster form. It was a plan born of folklore and desperation, our only weapon against the nightmare stalking us. But the plan was suicidal. The organs would be on one of the small cypress hammocks, the tree islands that dotted the swamp, and the creature would guard them with its life. One of us has to draw it away. Silas laid out the grim strategy. Keep it occupied. The other takes the dinghy to the island, finds the tree, destroys the soul. There was no choice to be made. I was younger, faster. Silas was the better captain, the one who knew how to handle the cypress witch. I would be the one to go. While Silas prepared to lead the creature on a chase across the bay, I untied the small, flat-bottomed dinghy, my hands shaking so badly I could barely manage the knot. He handed me a flare gun and a rusty machete. For the organs, he said, and a can of gasoline. Burn them, burn it all. As I pushed off into the black water, Silas started the engine and roared away, heading for the far side of the bay. The Stygiani, letting out an enraged shriek, gave chase. I was alone, paddling a tiny boat towards a dark island, my only light the distant, bobbing stern light of the cypress witch and the horrifying, shadowy form in its wake. The journey to the cypress hammock was a nightmare in itself. The narrow waterway was a tunnel of tangled mangrove roots and hanging Spanish moss. The water was shallow, and my paddle scraped against unseen things below. I was terrified of running aground, of being trapped. The air was thick with the smell of decay and poisonous plants like poisonwood, which could raise rashes on the skin with a simple touch. I used my flashlight sparingly, sweeping its beam across the trees in short, panic bursts, terrified of what the light might reveal. I found the tree at the heart of the small island. It was an ancient, gnarled cypress, its branches like skeletal arms reaching for the sky. And hanging from them, suspended by glistening, sinewy threads, were the organs. It was the single most obscene sight I have ever witnessed. A pulsating, living mass of viscera, a heart, lungs, intestines, all glowing with a faint, sickly luminescence. It was the creature's soul, laid bare and vulnerable. I uncapped the can of gasoline and began to dose the hanging horror. The smell of petrol was sharp, clean, and blessedly modern in this ancient, foul place. But I was too slow. A piercing shriek ripped through the air from right behind me. The Stygiani had realized the deception. It burst through the trees, a 9-foot-tall whirlwind of claws and fury. I fired the flare gun directly at its face. The brilliant red projectile struck it in the chest, not harming it but momentarily blinding it with a shower of magnesium sparks. It gave me the second I needed. I threw my lit Zippo at the gasoline-soaked organs. They erupted in a pillar of fire, letting out a sound that was not of this world, a psychic scream that echoed in my skull, a chorus of agony and rage. The Stygiani shrieked in unison, a physical manifestation of the sound, and lunged for me. I scrambled backwards, falling into the murky water as it thrashed in the firelight, its form flickering and distorting. Just then, the first true rays of dawn pierced the canopy. Sunlight, pure and golden, streamed through the trees. When it touched the creature's skin, the Stygiani began to dissolve. It didn't burn, it unraveled, its solid form breaking down into black ash and shadow, its final, agonized cry absorbed by the morning light. I stumbled back to the ding and paddled towards the Cypress Witch, which was now drifting silently in the middle of the bay. I found Silas slumped over the console, his chest a bloody ruin of deep, raking claw marks. He was alive, but only just. He looked up at me, a faint, grim smile on his lips. "You did it, kid." He pressed a heavy, leather-bound journal into my hands. It was filled with spidery handwriting, detailing lore, celestial charts, and the locations of other, similar places around the world. "The river needs a keeper," he rasped, his breath catching. "The rules must be kept." With a final, shuddering sigh, his eyes went vacant. The horror wasn't over. I had survived, but I had not won. Victory was never an option. Months later, I stand on that same rickety dock. The Cypress Witch floats calmly, her scars now my scars. I am the captain now. I am the keeper. I see a young man walking towards me, his face etched with the same quiet desperation I once wore. He found my flyer, pinned to the same gas station bulletin board. I look him over, and with the dead, hollowed out seriousness that was once Silas's, I hand him a clean, newly laminated card. The cycle continues. The horror is not a monster that can be killed. It is a duty that must be served. It is a tide that never goes out,